Welcome to Business Notes. I'm your host, Diane Bogino, President of Performance Strategies and Diane Bogino Development. Our guest today is Jeremy Segal. Jeremy hosts a weekly meetup for influencers and thought leaders. He's also the host of Why Influence, a podcast and YouTube channel where he interviews influencers and why they're sharing. Before starting his platform, Jeremy never shared online and rarely in person. Over the past few years, he's intentionally overcome many barriers to sharing bigger and is now on a mission to help others grow their voice. He's also a serial entrepreneur with experience starting, building, and selling businesses. Jeremy, welcome to Business Notes, and thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. I really appreciate you having me.
What was your world like before you started sharing online?
Yeah, good question. So I was an entrepreneur, so I always wanted to be a CFO of a company and then be an entrepreneur. So I was very laser focused for that. And by the age of 25, I was a CFO of a 150 employee company. And then after that, I gave myself permission to become an entrepreneur, even though I've done a lot of entrepreneurial things before that. And then I built and sold a business over a 2-year period. So I went through the whole process of starting, going through the whole process of building a business and then the exit. And that was before age 30. After that, I started another business. Each time I start a business, I grow a social following. So I've got one now that I've grown over 200,000 social followers for, but I'm completely behind the scenes. So anytime I was in a picture or in a video, I'd edit myself out. I was very intentionally not in front of anything. And we even got featured on the news, and I got a friend to be the face of the business so that I didn't have to do it. So this whole time, I'm building up all this wisdom, right? I've been a CFO of a company, been an entrepreneur at a pretty young age. And I never really shared. I moved out of state from where I grew up. I didn't really call people, text many people. Unless you had me one-on-one in person, you really didn't have access to the wisdom that I had. So then I started going to Toastmasters, I started going to mastermind groups, and I started learning that my voice mattered more and that I was able to help people, take leaps in mindsets very quickly with a short conversation. And that made me realize okay, maybe I should be sharing in a bigger way, but I had a lot of barriers in my way. So I was very intentional to self-develop, to grow so I could start sharing in bigger ways. And sort of the purpose of what I'm doing right now is to help other people overcome their barriers so that they can share what they're good at or passionate about in bigger ways as well, so that they can make the impact that they want to make. But before I started sharing, I literally never shared. And then I started a podcast out of the blue. But right before starting my podcast, the last time I shared on Facebook was 7 months prior. And I had one comment from a friend saying, "Dang, you're still on Facebook." So I literally went from this guy never shares to boom, he has a podcast. So it's very cold turkey starting to share.
Well, what was the catalyst that made you start sharing?
I think it was just noticing that I wasn't really sharing a lot of the wisdom I had, and I feel like I could help a lot of people. And something I've definitely discovered now that I've been doing this for a while is that everybody is very good at something, and something that you can tell somebody a piece of advice that you think is a small give. You'd be, "Oh, well, what have you done this or tried this?" And it'd be something that's 100% common sense to you because you're in your world, right? But someone else is not in your world, and they'll be like, "That's exactly what I needed to hear." And they just got so much value from something that you consider small. And I think a lot of people underestimate that.
Right. I think a lot of us struggle with that. What has the impact been since you've been sharing? What have you seen?
Yeah. So personally, I've had a lot of personal growth with it because I'm interviewing influencers about why they're sharing. So I'm constantly surrounding myself by people who are being vulnerable and authentic in big ways. So I'm building community around that. And then, so I'm self-developing and growing and becoming more comfortable as I go through the journey. And then I'm finding that there's other people who are, resonating with it. And so now I've been hosting a meetup where a weekly meetup where people can get together and get the support that they need to make a bigger impact. But I've had, like, I did my first speaking event at a podcast conference, and the day after that, some lady came up to me and she's like, "Hey, after seeing you speak, I feel inspired to apply to speak next year, even though I'm completely terrified and I've never spoken on stage before." So like I've gotten a couple like, you know, good positive feedbacks like that, and things trickle in. Like even on LinkedIn, it's like somebody who's never liked or commented on a post will private message me and say, "Hey, you know, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work." So those positive encouragements, you know, help with that.
Right. Great inspiration for you to keep going.
Yeah.
So do you mind sharing some advice that you've gotten from guests on your shows?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different kind of advice. I'd say tactfully, some of the biggest advice could be like, you know, a lot of people think, you know, you can create a couple of pieces of content and then wait around, and then now you're become like, you know, you have a community of people. But it's not like that. You gotta first start, and then you gotta then be able to keep going. And the hardest part is to start, and then the next hardest part is to keep going. And so when you see, like, you know, I've been to a lot of meetups, a lot of communities, and with YouTubers, podcasters, all kinds of influencers, and you know, it's so common to see people be like, "Hey, can you give me some advice?" And you look at their content, and it's like, "Well, you haven't posted in a couple months." Like, you know, the advice I have is to keep going, right? To keep sharing. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice, is to start and to keep going. And the best way to do that is to really refine your why, because if your why is strong enough, then you'll overcome the barriers that it takes to share in that level. So if your why is strong enough, like you'll overcome the barriers that will stop you from starting. And then if your why is strong enough, you'll overcome the barriers that it takes to keep going. So that'd be the most tactfully advice that I've heard.
Right. I saw a show of yours the other day where you two were discussing the continuity and the frequency, like you just mentioned. Is there some secret to that?
Yeah, it definitely varies based on platform, but and everyone has different opinions, so people probably won't agree with what I think. But you know, there's two sort of angles at it. Is one, it's consistency, and two is frequency. And you know, of course, you have to keep some kind of base level of caliber of quality, and make sure that you experiment to see what's working, what's resonating. Maybe it's something you don't really know would unless you experimented. So throw some curveballs in there. But I personally think the frequency is more important than consistency. Although I've talked to people that are very successful that have had the complete opposite, saying like consistency is more important. But like I've interviewed a YouTuber. He grew about 80,000 subscribers in his first year, and then he's up to like almost 300,000 after his second year. And he started out with doing daily videos, and now he's doing like 3 or 4 videos a day. And he's just putting out so much content that, you know, that frequency is just like, you know, he's hitting all the keywords. He's like hitting everything, and it's hard to compete with that, right? So I think that if you have the capacity to share more and to push more content out, of course, I think that would be beneficial. But you need to also, you know, control your sanity too. I mean, nobody else can do what this guy's doing because he's so passionate about this thing. You know, like I couldn't do what he's doing. So just keep that in mind.
Right. Yeah. I still have to clean house, so there's no way. I
Right.
suppose, Jeremy, it would be safe to say that people have to experiment. And as you say, I like that word capacity that you used, understand your own capacity and do what works for you and your platform and your message.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, everyone I've talked to does everything completely different. So it's not about, you know, copying someone else or doing what someone else is doing. It's just do what works for you. And as long as you keep showing up, then you should keep, you know, keep growing.
Right. That's half the battle, showing up.
Yeah.
What would you tell your listeners and my viewers? Uh, what what do they need to do to grow their influence?
Uh, I would definitely say if you're not sharing online, or, you know, in other influencer capacities, maybe speaking on stages or writing books, things like that. Like you have to take action to grow influence. You can't just keep thinking or being strategic. So that's probably the biggest thing I see is that people aren't taking the action that's necessary. So if you haven't started, start. If you have started, keep going. And if you are already established, then experiment more and see what you find is working better. There's a guy I interviewed that had over 1 million Instagram followers and 1.5 million followers on Facebook. And like the whole interview with him, he was just constantly saying you need to experiment, like experiment, 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 because that's the only way that you're going to grow. And if you keep sharing and you're not seeing growth, like you've been doing the same thing for a while, like something is wrong there, right? It's you know, you're not growing your audience. So find what's not working. You know, maybe it's not even what you're sharing, and maybe it's how you're sharing it. But just I think experimenting is going to be you know, the biggest thing once you are already started and continue going, because those are the two first big hurdles.
Interesting. So, Jeremy, I don't understand why skydivers jump out of a perfectly good airplane, and some people will not understand why you jumped out of a perfectly good CFO position, probably a nice steady job. I mean, did your mother say, "What are you thinking?" What inspired you to make that change?
Yeah. My parents questioned me a lot during my career. Um, I think that I was always driven to be an entrepreneur, and I was always driven to be a CFO. And I was a CFO of this company. I helped them with a huge like change management situation, helped them cut a lot of costs, and built like a strategy for them to follow for a couple of years after I left, which they actually implemented. But I think that I had to stay true to who I am and what I'm passionate about. And what I was passionate about was, you know, being an entrepreneur at the time and building the lifestyle that I wanted. And you know, I gave myself permission to do that once I got that CFO position. So I think it's good to just do what you're passionate about, and sometimes it's going to take longer than you expect. But if you're going to be like pursuing something for money, you know, you might have money grow a lot slower if you're chasing your passion. But I think it's worthwhile because once you're 5 years or, you know, a certain amount of time into whatever it is that you're passionate about, you'll most likely be able to make a living doing it. And then now, you know, maybe you make less money, but you're going to be happier overall. So I think that, you know, you got to, you know, weigh your pros and cons for, do you want your comfort and in the stable income, good career path, or do you want to take sort of an unconventional path and start the journey for doing something you're more passionate about? So that's sort of what I think is true. And especially with the influencer stuff that I do, you know, if you're going to share about stuff, you know, if you've got a choice to share on something that's going to make you money versus something that you're actually passionate about, you'll definitely have more potential for success if it's what you're passionate about, I think.
Right. Yeah. Life is too short not to be happy. People are living longer and they're having to work longer. Do you think that podcasting is just for the younger generation, or do you think older people, obviously I'm not a spring chicken and I'm doing it, but do you think even older retired people can make a few shekels at podcasting?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, podcasting and really any social platform. I just had a guest the other day on my podcast, Mike Peace, wood turning. He's he's been retired for 14 years, and he's been wood turning on YouTube for the past 6 years. And he does virtual speaking events at wood turning clubs, and he shares his wood turning stuff on YouTube. And he doesn't need the money. He's all the money he's making is buying more wood turning equipment because it's a hobby of his. But I think that's true for podcasting too. You know, there's no reason, you know, any age should stop you. Like even my community that I have, like we meet every week, and we've got, you know, anything from young people all the way up to, you know, retired people that are sharing and being vulnerable and authentic online and building communities of their own. So it's definitely, I definitely wouldn't hold yourself back because of age, because this whole thing is so young anyway. I mean, the whole internet, podcasting, even YouTube, like, you know, people live longer nowadays. So, and you have a lot of wisdom that you've built over the years. So I think it's worthwhile to share that. You know, I wish, you know, my grandparents would start a podcast or start sharing their wisdom, because there's so much that they have, you know.
Right. I hope my grandson says it about me. Uh, Final question. I would like for you to give our viewers a few examples of some online businesses that you have, and an example of an online business that an older person might do.
Um, do you mind saying again, or rephrasing a little bit?
Okay. We'll do take two on that question. Jeremy, last question. What are some of the online businesses that you have currently, and what kind of an online business might an older person engage in order to either make a living or just keep their mind active?
Yeah, sure. So some of the businesses that I have going, I've got a niche car dealership. So I import classic Japanese cars from Japan. They're 25 years old, so they're exempt from emissions and safety requirements. So they're sort of like Fast and Furious kind of cars. So they're like the classic Nissan Skyline GTR, Toyota Supra, RX-7, NSX, those kind of cars. So I've been doing that for, I guess, almost 6 years now. And we've got about a little over 200,000 social followers that we've grown there. I do some cryptocurrency mining. We built a 10-foot shipping container full of cryptocurrency mining hardware. So computer rigs with 8 GPUs apiece. And we're looking to potentially build a large-scale GPU farm in the process of figuring that out. And there's just dabbling little things. I've got my podcast. It's called Why Influence, WHY Influence, and I interview influencers about why they're sharing. And then we've got the community that's tied to that. So every week we do a virtual meetup with aspiring influencers and influencers, and bring in guest speakers and do networking. So that's generally what my world looks like right now. So if you're looking to start an internet business, I would say, you know, do something that you're passionate about. I mean, that's the first thing I would do is just think about what you have skills for. Like, what do you do as a hobby that you could maybe evolve into a business? If you're trying to start a business, like an actual business, I think e-commerce is a good way to go. If you can build, like, you know, things with your hands or design things. If you do services, like if you got experience with services, you could always you know, offer your services to other people and be a freelance consultant. And if you want to build a team, if you're able to get clients pretty well, and maybe your strategy is to build a team and then get those freelance consultants working for you to help fulfill the needs. I think there's a lot of angles, but a lot of the stuff I'm doing now is the influencer space. And I think that if you just start sharing, you know, whatever platform you like, if it's LinkedIn, YouTube, if you start sharing just what you're passionate about, you know, over time, people will see you as the expert in that. And then you'll have opportunities arise, whether it's, you know, speaking or consulting or just through sponsorship opportunities. There's essentially, like, there's so many options for doing business nowadays. It just varies a lot, but I'm happy to help you bounce ideas if you have any.
Great offer too. Yeah, I had a neighbor one time that he had escaped from communist Cuba. He said, "If you're not making money in America, you're not trying." I love that quote. Jeremy,
Yeah.
you've brought so much inspiration to your listeners and my viewers today at all levels, at all ages, and I appreciate you being on the show today and sharing your wisdom with us.
Well, thanks so much, Diane. I really appreciate you having me. And just real quick to the listeners, if you've been tuning into Diane for a while now and you haven't sent her just a private message or just a thank you email, I definitely encourage you to do that, because it's great to hear that positive encouragement, especially early on in things. So if you've been watching these videos or listening to this show, just send Diane a note, because I'm sure she'll appreciate that a lot.
I will. Thank you. I appreciate you, Jeremy.
Sure.
And cut that showbiz talk. Okay. Do you know Terry Brock?